Yeah, it's actually it's not a lot of fun to talk about, but I did grow up in in poverty, like a lot of people do, as you said. Faced a lot of challenges related to just not having the resources to do things like pay the rent, keep the heat on sometimes, and so we try to tell that story because we think that there's some value in it for people. We want to get the story out there because mine has a very happy ending. I was fortunate enough to get out of poverty, and although it took me a long time and a lot of night school and community college classes, eventually I graduated from Harvard Law School and now have a very comfortable kind of middle-class life. 5 kids. My wife, Amy, we're going to celebrate our 25th year of marriage this year. And, so I think part of the important telling that story is it reflects my belief in America. In any other country in the world, a guy like me could never go from poverty, from really abject poverty at times, to graduating from Harvard Law School and having this kind of life. And I really want to make sure that message gets out, and that the America I grew up in is, the America we have in the future.
Yeah, I think it's an important thing to be able to talk about, because there are so many of us, as we mentioned, who have that background, people still currently dealing with these issues, and to be quite blunt, most of our elected officials don't really have those concerns. Of course, there's exceptions. There's our people that overcome things, but a lot of times they don't. So when someone has, it's good that they get the chance to talk about it so that maybe someone can understand, all right, well, this guy can kind of relate to these problems that, maybe I don't care so much about what's going on in the Ukraine. I care about, keeping the lights on and the heat on and having food on the table. Talk a little bit about how actually at one point in your life you did, as a teenager, you were actually homeless and you worked as many as 4 jobs at one time.
Yeah, they were, of course, all part-time jobs and all kind of minimum wage things. But, I was doing whatever I could to survive. And there came a time, there's actually been a couple of times in my life where I didn't have a home. Either the one that I think you're referring to, I had maybe $20 in my pocket and had just been fired from my job. And part of the job was I got a room in one of the owner of the business's rentals, and so he required me to exit when the job ended, and I had no place to go, and I only had $20, and that was scary. Fortunately, a friend of a friend kind of let me sleep on their kids' bunk beds. Had the kids go sleep in the living room or something, and I got to sleep on the bunk beds for a few days until I could get back on my feet a little bit.
Sure.
But that's, being in those kinds of situations gives me an empathy for people who are struggling, and because when you're faced with that kind of a challenge, your focus is so immediate. You don't have a long-term plan. You don't have a sense of this is where I could go or what I could do. What you're thinking of is, how am I going to eat? How am I going to not end up on the street? How am I going to, and especially if you have a family, it's even worse. How am I going to feed my kids, right? So I think people who haven't been in that situation don't understand how insecure that is and how difficult it is to get out of it, because you can't take a long-term view. You're always thinking about tomorrow, or how am I going to pay the rent in a week?
I'm Christian Blatt, sitting in for Dennis Miller here on the Dennis Miller Show. We're talking to Jason Conger, whose website is congerfororegon.com. So let's talk about how you mentioned your story has a happy ending. Let's talk about how you take the LSATs, you get to go to Harvard Law, and it seems like things kind of pick up at that point, and you're a successful lawyer at this point. What makes you decide to run for state Congress there in Oregon?
Well, it's a combination of things. There's certainly a need. People in Oregon are just crying out for leadership, for people who will step up in public service and do the job of governing, do the job that they were elected to do, instead of, kind of always having the political advancement focus. I think there's a real need. There's a lot of politicians who are very, in my opinion, very superficial, say whatever they think they need to get elected. And we kind of get this, DC PAC, high-priced lobbyist, slick marketing campaign. And we don't get people representing us as citizens who we think or who we believe in. And I think it's time somebody just stood up and said, look, I'm not for those things. I'm for the working families and the middle class, and I'm going to tell you exactly who I am. I'm going to be open and honest. And, that means that sometimes people aren't going to agree on issues, or they're not, maybe they won't vote for me because they know where I stand on
right.
things, and they don't think that they don't have the same position on the issue. But I think it's long overdue. People are, cynical. The polls certainly show it in terms of politicians' favorability ratings, or Congress's, or the president's for that matter. And there's a need for people to step up just to serve and to do the job of governing. And I think it's long overdue. And I think certainly I ran in a very Democratic district. I'm a Republican.
Yeah, and that's actually my question that I was going to ask you. We're talking to Jason Conger. His website is congerfororegon.com. You're going to be running for the United States Senate, and the perception of Oregon, to those of us that don't live there, is that it's a very heavily Democratic state. And is that accurate? And if so, how do you feel like you'll be able to distinguish yourself as something that the majority of Oregonians, I don't know if I've actually said that word properly, but the majority of voters there in your state would support?
Well, again, I ran in a district, to become a state rep in 2010 against a Democrat incumbent. The district that I represent looks demographically a lot like the state. And we won that election by almost 12 points. I was reelected by almost 13. And by 2012, when I was reelected, there were fewer Republicans than non-affiliated, let's say, broadly speaking, and still more than that, Democrats. So, running from a real minority position. But we won by 13%, or about 24 points higher than Mitt Romney in that district.
Right.
And the reason is, like the state, it's not so much that Oregon is overwhelmingly Democratic. Certainly there are more Democrats than Republicans registered, but about a third of the electorate is non-affiliated. And those folks are people who have sort of rejected party. Obviously they self-selected not to be Democrat or Republican, and they're eclectic. I mean, they're all over the map ideologically, and they're more issue-driven. And what Republicans need, I think, to be persuasive and to win in Oregon, as I have in my state district, is to be able to communicate with those folks, and again, to offer something to them that matters. Honesty, kind of openness about where you stand on issues. And what I found is that people are willing to give you grace, even if they don't agree on one particular issue. They're willing to give you some grace if they trust you and they know that you care and that you'll do the job, that you're there for them. So I think that opportunity exists statewide. In fact, I know it does. I think, given that roughly a third of the electorate is independent or non-affiliated, and a third of the electorate is Republican, Republicans should already be winning if we can stop kind of putting up the establishment liberal, rich, white Republican every time and offer something that has a candidate who can appeal and communicate with those folks who aren't already convinced.
Well, Jason Conger, best of luck to you in the upcoming election, and we hope to check back in with you as the campaign goes on. He's Jason Conger. The website is congerfororegon.com.